Hi, everyone. Welcome to Babies with Knives. Today, we're having a sit down with Fil Kearney above me. Hi, Phil.
Oh, yep.
And we're going to be talking about his new product, Untap Burn. And I'm your host, Alice Peng, aka Lala Twiddle, and below me is Brandon Powers.
Howdy, howdy, everybody. First of all, I love the name just because of my Magic the Gathering days. I have not played any official things since they went to You Don't Mana Burn, and at the games that we always played, we're like, no, we're still using Mana Burn. And so.
Excellent.
Yeah, Brandon and I both have a long history with Magic the Gathering and absolutely love it. Still curse the fact that, certain cards were sold, like how many Black Lotuses would it take to have made our house and such. But anyway.
They had an Antiques Roadshow recently where someone had a set of all the mocks, as well as it was like the 12 classics. They were all on one page. They're like, yeah, that's like $80,000 right there. And the gal's husband passed away, and it was just in the garage, and she was just looking at junk stuff. He's like, someone's bring this by. What do you think? The guy was drooling. It was amazing.
That's awesome that's on Antiques Roadshow.
Yeah,
that's fantastic.
It was recent too. It was like 5 weeks ago.
That's crazy. Yeah, Brandon and I have cursed ourselves for the cards that we've lost over the years since our young age, and multiple card games that yeah. So I understand that your game system or your subsystem is made for D&D 5th edition, and it is a spell point alternative to the Vancian system, and it's based off of Magic the Gathering, correct?
That is correct. Yeah.
Could you give us a little elevator pitch about how it works?
Sure, absolutely. Because Wizards of the Coast owns the IPs for both Dungeons and Dragons as well as Wizards of the Coast, and has began rolling out campaign settings in Dungeons and Dragons based on the different planes within the Magic Universe IP, then that allows us, the Ravnica and now soon Theros, are both going to be eligible for DM's Guild material that we creators can basically produce whatever we want, as long as it stays on the DM's Guild and Wizards of the Coast gets their cut, which is totally fair to me. So what that means is that I can now actually start building officially a spell point system that's based on the 5 colors of Magic. Basically, the Dungeon Master Guide already has a spell point system, but they had to make the point system, if you've seen it, it's clumsy. It's like 2 points for first level, 3 points for second level, and it scales up to 13 points for 9th level spells. And the reason they had to do that is because spell points and spell slots are what you would consider universal. It doesn't matter what spell you're casting, what class you're in, or what school of magic it comes from. If you got enough magic juice to cast it, it doesn't matter, you can cast it. So what Untap Burn does, 5 color mana spell point variant rules, is that it takes those spell points and it has each of them get separated into different pools of colors. So as long as you have enough red mana, you can cast red spells. As long as you have enough blue mana, you can cast blue spells. And there's some really interesting mechanics inside that say when you can and can't cast a spell of a certain color, depending on whatever your color pool looks like. And it's actually really intuitive. You just got to look at the rules and see what they are first. So basically, all the spells in this system, there's a lot of ways to do it, but in this system, all spells are devoted to a single color. You can very well argue that, like, say, healing could be green because of, like, Spring of Life from the first set. It's X green equals hit points regained. But there's a ton of white cards that offer healing. Vampirism, like Vampiric Touch, for example, gives you hit points back by taking hit points away from other people. There's a lot of ways you could gain healing. Yeah, exactly. There's a lot of mechanics you can go about it, but for the simplest, most universal application of these core mechanics, it's built that each spell is devoted to a single color. The game then becomes, how can I get that spell into a color I want? And a lot of the classes, not every class, but like the heavier classes, have different means of being able to pull a spell from, like, say, the green list and put it into the red list, or I can use my mana for more than just red. If I have a pool of red, I might be able to use it for black, for instance. It just depends on how you build the character, and all of those are rules that are laid out in this product. So depending on what kind of character you play depends on what rules you want to pay attention to, which are outlined in each class that's detailed in chapter 4.
That's awesome. Now, before we started here, we were talking a little bit, and white, for instance, has the light aspect. Blue has illusion, and so I just looking through at the cantrips, I saw that
Sure.
the dancing lights is put over into the blue instead of the white, and
Yep.
would love to get some of that insight as to how you made some of these decisions.
Absolutely. So to preface the answer to that, anyone that buys this gets Excel spreadsheets that has a master list of, like, if you're looking through the PDF, like if you go to page 6, you can start seeing where the lists are at. And anyone that's playing along, if you want to provide, if there's going to be a link to the product on the DMs Guild, the preview is 100% free. So like the 75-page book, they can look from page 1 to 75 to see if the whole thing, if they like it or not. So anyone that's still listening is welcome to go to the link. Just look up Untap Burn core mechanics. Google will take you to it right away.
It'll be down in the description below. Don't worry.
Okay.
We always
So
include
you
that
just
in show
click on,
notes.
you can click on full preview. And if you're on a mobile phone, you can download it. Or if you're on a browser, you can just look at it. But when you go to page 6, you're going to see that all the spells per level are broken into vertical shafts of each color: white, blue, black, red, and green. So and then on page 5, it shows what the different aspects of each magic is. So when you're building a magic paradigm, and I'll just spiel on this for a few minutes, I guess.
Sure, go ahead.
When you're building a magic paradigm, you have to first define how many facets of magic that you're going to have. And the traditional player's handbook has 8 facets, which they call the 8 schools of magic, which is like abjuration, conjuration, illusion, necromancy, etc. And those different facets are defined by a single aspect, which is, if it's an illusion spell, it creates an illusion of whatever that means. It's normally within the description of the spell why it's an illusion. So they just say, if it's an illusion spell, it's an illusion. It's obviously it's in the illusion school. If it's in the alteration school, it's because it makes a change to whatever the target of the spell is. So when the Dungeons and Dragons has 50 years of tradition backed up on what these 8 schools are. So the reason why a spell is in the school that it's in is because that's the school that it's in. If detect magic is divination, because it's always been divination. But when you build a new paradigm like this, which only has 5 facets instead of 8, you have to start consolidating. And you can't just throw away the whole player's handbook spell list and then start creating a new spell list based off the Magic the Gathering, because you'd have 40 different counterspells. Instead, what you have to do is you have to take all the spells from the player's handbook and figure out how can they universally be defined. So like white has binding, disruption, enhancement, light, protection, radiance, suppression, while blue has communication, dimensional magic, illusions, knowledge, reveal, time, voyages. So when I'm looking at, and there's a lot of spells that you could have the same question about, why would dancing lights go into blue as an illusion? It's simply because it's being defined as an illusion by the player's handbook. I wanted to make it as quick and simple for people to be able to pick this up to use in any campaign setting without thinking that if it's not Magic the Gathering, it doesn't apply to me. I use this book in my Eberron campaign. It can be used in any kind of campaign. So getting back to the preface, I provide a spreadsheet that has all the spells in. It's an Excel spreadsheet, so you can edit it. So if you were to decide that dancing lights, because it's light, overrides that it's an illusion, so I'm just going to cut and paste it into white, that is your spell list. And that is a way that a DM can define his campaign by saying anything that has anything to do with elements is supposed to be green. So even though Fireball or Lightning Bolt may traditionally be called a red spell for Magic the Gathering, because I say, hypothetically, anything involving elements goes in green, then you would just pull all those spells and drop them into green. So the book here just shows the tenets or the aspects of Magic that I chose. And the reason I chose those is because it allowed to have as nearly an equal number of spells in every color that I could manageably create while remaining true to what these aspects define. So I wanted to make sure that if I chose a green wizard, I wouldn't be screwed because I don't have any spells. I want to make sure if you're going to, it doesn't matter what color you choose, you're going to have viable options that is like, I want to play a green wizard because I'm going to get access to these spells. And those are spells that I specifically want to specialize in. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. And for our viewers, I have the mana playmat showing right now. Can you explain how that mana playmat works for people a little bit?
Sure. Did you flip to that with the PDF?
Yes, I grabbed the PDF and it's showing to our viewers the same way as all the other stuff I showed you.
Oh, okay, wicked. So when I built this PDF, when you look at the chapter headings, they've got the little 3 bars for the menu, and then next to that they have a little chart. So at any point you can click on the little menu button and it'll take you to the table of contents. But if you click on the chart, it'll automatically take you to the mana flow chart. So you can always get there quickly from the beginning of any chapter. It's really easily navigated. So sitting inside of the mana flow chart, when you're thinking about using mana, if you don't have any knowledge about Magic the Gathering, then I can crash course you really quick. But if you are familiar with Magic the Gathering, almost everything on this page is going to make sense to you intuitively. In that here's how Tap Untap Burn works. When you are a spellcaster, casting a spell is going to cost you 1 point per level of spell. So if you want to cast a first level spell, it's going to cost 1 point. 2 spells equals 2. Up to if you're going to cast a 9th level spell, it's going to cost you 9 points. To be able to cast a spell, you need to make sure you have enough mana in the pool available to cast. So if I want to cast a 3rd level red spell like a Fireball, I need to have 3 red mana.
I have a question for that. So in your system, is there colorless? So like in, blue and 2, could you basically say that there are certain spells that you need 1 blue and then you could dump 2 green into that if needed?
When I originally built the book, one of the things I was thinking about doing was being really mean about color requirements, like for example, really useful spells or things that can disrupt an encounter, like Enfeeblement, for example. I think it's an 8th level spell, requiring it 5 black and 3 blue mana to cast it would place a lot of hard limits on how well that spell could be cast. And a DM could always incorporate custom costs. If you're going to say design your own spell, you could absolutely force the researching of that spell to require X, Y, or Z colors to cast. But that's not very friendly. It's the simpler you make a system, the better off it is. So the solution to colorless, 2x1r, for example, you've got the XX and then 1R, like you'd see on a mana card if you're casting Flare or something like that.
Yep.
Yeah. The solution that we have instead to keep this simple is that as long as you have enough mana to cast a spell, you can burn any color you want. So if I have 10 mana, 3 being red and 5 being whatever, then if I want to cast that Fireball, as long as I don't touch those 3 mana, I can keep casting Fireball. But as soon as I start eating up that red mana, I lose access to 3rd level spells. Very simple.
Very different than what I expected, because I expected you to have to burn that red mana, since I'm playing Magic the Gathering, when you tap the red mana. That's the reason why I was asking. So you actually have to keep it in your pool, which is a bit different than Magic the Gathering itself, which is a good thing I asked, because that's very different conception. I'm very cool.
Yeah, thank you.
When he and I were talking about this before, I actually was reminded of Shadow Fist, actually, on the kind of the way that works different. But that's my point of reference.
There's like a number of games that you build resources, and as long as you have that amount of resources, you can do everything you want with it, and you can maybe burn other resources to use it. You were asking about monks earlier. It's kind of the same thing. Like, you can use key to cast spells if you're willing to burn the key for it, assuming that you've got enough mana to do it. Or like if you're a color-coded monk and like all of your abilities, or like say the Shadow Monk is black, if you have a mana pool off of a wizard, like if you're a wizard monk mix, you can be borrowing from your wizard's mana pool to be triggering different monk effects while the key remains available, because key and mana are the same thing in this system. So it allows multi-classing to be incredibly kind, and I love monks. So allowing key points to bleed over into a mana pool. There's some rules about that, because they like them and warlocks, they refresh on a short rest, as opposed to all the other classes which refresh on a long rest. So the pools are kept separate. But anything that has a long rest, they mix. Anything that's on a short rest generally can mix together as well. So you kind of have those two short rest, long rest points. Then there's also high magic and common magic. Like there's always this division about wizards saying that like level 6 and higher level spells are particularly difficult to cast, and therefore you have a limit on how many of those spells per day you can cast. If you're using a spell point system, if you're using spell slots, you get 2 6, 2 7, and then 1/8 and 1/9. And then if you're using the DMG spell point system, they restrict it further by saying you only get 1 6, 1 7, 1/8, and 1/9. What originally when I built that, I let go of those restrictions altogether, saying that if all you want to do, like if you want to cast multiple 9th level spells, it's going to limit you, because you're going to eventually run out of mana and you won't be able to cast more. But if you decide to build a monochrome caster and you have 80 points, you're going to crack out, 7, 8, 9 9th level spells over the course, and that is legitimately unbalancing. So what I did is I loosened the restrictions of whatever your max spell level -5 is how many high magic spells you can cast per day. So if you're a 17th level caster, which gives you access to 9th level spells, then 9 minus 5 equals you can cast up to 4 spells of 6th, 7th, 8th, or 9th level. But the caveat is you have to burn mana devoted to the color of the spell. So if you want to cast I don't know, say Resurrection, which say is green. No, actually Resurrection is black. White. Because it's
black.
I define it as black because it's soul
that's true.
And
that's
death.
True.
So and because there's so little black spells that naturally end up in D&D, it's lacking. It's severely lacking. So I figured the easiest way to be able to pull some black into the equation is to make Revivify, Raise Dead, all that stuff, make those black. So,
but as you mentioned, if needed, a person can make it white, right?
Yeah. So, you can research it. So, like if you wanted to, if your DM requires you to, the DM could just decide, we want to limit this so you only have to have 2 colors to make it easier on you. Then we could just shuffle all the spells that you want into those 2 colors, maybe white and black if you're playing Orzhov, for instance. Or if you want to keep the colors wide so that you have a reason to force the team to do downtime activities like spell research. You can say you can make any spell any color you want, but you're going to have to spend the time researching it so you alone can cast that spell and the color that you choose. So when you're going through an adventure, you can run across an Archmage's spell book. Everything in there is blue. It's like, I just found a huge blue trove. If I can learn all these, I can pull all these spells into my blue list. So anytime someone's like, I would really like to be able to have this type of magic be this particular color, that gives your DM an excuse to introduce an adventure where you're making a raid against people that do that. Or you can set them up as a potential ally who will be able to teach them to you if you're willing to do adventures and gigs for them in exchange for that knowledge. So it really can lean into role playing, or you can just arbitrarily because you have the lists, you can just rebuild the lists depending on what kind of involvement the DM wants your player to have to get access to what he wants.
Well, I, as a personal preference, definitely have a love for non-Vancian advancement in D&D style games. So this is one that I'm very excited about. But as we said, Brandon, myself, and you all have a very solid foundation in Magic the Gathering, 20 plus years for Brandon and I of Magic the Gathering. But for our viewers that don't have any background in Magic the Gathering, could you give them a crash course like you mentioned?
Yeah. So looking at the mana flow chart, as I said, when you gain levels, you are continuing to add points into your mana pool. And when you gain a level, you are going to decide what color each point you gain is going to be. And that's going to mostly be based off of looking at the spell list that's available to you and saying, well, hey, I just got access to third level spells. Maybe I already have like at fifth level, you have like say a wizard or a cleric, any full casting class at fifth level has 16 spell points, and there's only 5 colors of magic. It only takes 3 to cast a third level spell. So if you wanted to have all options available to you automatically, you just take 3 points in each color, and then you have 1 left over. And then when you gain, say, 6th level, you get an extra 4, so you go from 16 to 20. At that point, you probably have an idea of what color are you leaning into more, so you might want to add more to that. And like, say, if you're doing a lot of blasting or if you're doing a lot of team buffing, you might decide to lean into white and red. Red is more aggressive and flashbang, as well as like persistent buffs. and then like white has a ton of protection. So like aid, a magic weapon, protection from elements, a lot of those spells fall in white. So
white, I'm red.
So you guys could both build white, red characters and have a very different array of spells depending on what you wanted to focus on. Because you want to make, like, if you're focusing on red, you want to make sure that you're keeping your red pool active, and you could afford to burn your white because you're not going to use that as much, but it's there for backup. But if you really want to, and then vice versa, if you want to be heavy white, you'll have a large white pool, and then maybe you just want to have some red in there just so you can have some kick when you need it. So the system is built so that you automatically can have access to every spell if you want, if you diversify. But if you want to kit out, like kind of like how 3rd edition would let you build really unique character builds depending on what options you took as you progressed, this system lets you do that same thing for spellcasting. Because if I want to build like a Boros red-white character that all they do is protection and damage type spells, then you're going to have far more mana than you actually need to cast those spells. So you can just whip out, flame, not worry about it, because it's going to take you a while to burn through your stack. So for people, hopefully that is a basic enough idea for people that aren't familiar with the basic ideas of how mana works. So when you're looking at the mana flow chart over on the left-hand side, you've got your total mana. And you're just going to list out, like say 3 white, 3 blue, 4 black, 3 red, 3 green. There's your 16 points. And then when you gain 4, you could like tack them all in, so you're not having 4 of each color, or you could just deep dive into one of them like we were talking about. But you list out your mana pool there. Your max spell level, it hasn't changed. It's basically, if you're a full, it's just whatever your class does. Like Rangers, I think, get access to 2nd level spells at 5th level. We're playing 6th level characters. That means like full casters will have access to 3rd level spells. Half casters will have 2nd level spells, and the 3rd casters will have access to 1st level spells. And monks are different. So, and if you guys decide to go after that, then we'll look at those specifically. High magic, again, I talked about that. Whatever your max level spell is, -5 equals how much high magic you have per day. So if you're 17th level, that'd be a 9th level spell, -5. You'd have 4 high magic spells you can cast per day, but you still obviously have to spend the mana to cast them, and it has to be the mana. It has to be the same color of the spell, so they have to be devoted. So if you're going to cast a 9th level red spell, you have to have 9 mana available, and as soon as you cast it, it's gone. So that is a huge restriction on what kind of high magic you can have. If you only have 13 mana of every color, you could crack out a couple 9th level spells, but you're going to run out of mana in that color pretty fast. You like, if you have 13 mana, you cast a 9th level spell, you can't cast that color above 4th level anymore until you recover it somehow.
So that's the benefit of being more dedicated rather
Yes.
than a 5-color, a domain caster.
Yes, and the book talks about that. Like if you really want to be like dominate monster as a black spell, and as it's preset, you can change it obviously, but default it's black. So if you've got a character with 40 black mana, you can cast dominate monster repeatedly until either you hit your high magic limit for the day or you run out of black mana, whichever comes first. So so we got your high magic. If you have a class that can recover spells on a short, if you can recover arcane recovery for wizards, or the recovery for Circle of the Druids, they have spell points that come back on a short rest. Sorcery points come back on a short rest. Monks come back on a short rest. Warlocks come back on a short rest. And then it's a matter of just, like sorcery points here, but you could replace that with key if you wanted to, or these are just basically boxes for you to keep track of stuff. So the mana pool, moving over to the right, you're going to list out, it'd be sensible for you. The game if you buy the product, the game comes with a number of 20 millimeter tokens that I created that was approved by the DMs Guild that are knockoff copies of the color mana symbols, because the DMs Guild has very strict rules about what art assets you're allowed to use, and they provide a ton of art assets, but they didn't provide anything for Ravnica. Zero, because I suspect they had to get those IPs from the Magic the Gathering corporate, which is separate from Dungeons and Dragons. Even though they're both under the WOTC umbrella, they didn't get assets. So they couldn't give us any magic art for us to put in our own books. So I had to paint them all myself. So the the tokens I built, they're similar, but not the same. So they aren't IP infringing, but this was intended for tabletop games. So you would be able to print a sheet of 80 white tokens and then cut them out, and then as you do, you can just stack them onto your mana pool. But if you're limited to pen and having paper and a pencil, then you can just write how much of each color you have, and as you cast a spell, you would erase it and then replace it with how many you have left, which is why I actually use colored dice. Like I've got stacks of colored dice that are only 12 millimeter, and you can stack up a ton of these dice in the area that's available for the mana pool and the tap mana spot.
Yeah.
So, but if you're using if you're using land cards, you can do it just the same. You just got your stack of cards. It's all the same.
I'm going to pull out my unglued cards, my unglued mana.
My favorite are the Theros cards, where it's the symbol is just the symbol. It doesn't have any actually land at all. It's just a stylized painting of whatever the recognized mana symbol is. Those are my absolute favorite.
I love the old unglued landscape ones. They're so gorgeous, and I have a lot of foil ones that are special and sealed away because they were so special to me. So
that's awesome. But yeah, so it works just as well. But you can use pen and paper if you want.
Yep, exactly, pen and paper.
There's a lot of erasing.
So I do.
What about? Is there any gold or artifact? Is anything you've done to bring those elements into Mimic?
There are multiple magic items, but a magic like chapter 10 has magic items in them, and a lot of the trigger effects that require mana either ask for a specific color because of what the magic item is, or it doesn't care what the color is at all. As long as you just tap any color, it's just fine. So the idea of colorless mana is simply just like the mechanics of Magic. If it's colorless, it doesn't care what the color you're tapping. And they didn't actually introduce colorless mana until Eldrazi. So it's the super old 90s like alpha, beta, and first few seasons, which I'm the most familiar with, like up to Weatherlight. That was all color coded to something. But if it's a colorless effect, then you can literally you can tap any color you want. And that's the mechanics I dragged into this, because that's the easiest to wrap your head around. You can add a sixth facet, a sixth color into the integration, and that's fine. You can, but there's no spells that are default to colorless, so there isn't really any real value in doing that. if someone were to decide to reshuffle the spells and include like anything that involves an object, like animate object, for instance, or fabricate, maybe those could theoretically be colorless spells. But I didn't want to go there because that made things needlessly complicated for the core mechanics that I'm building.
What about gold, like I asked?
I'm not familiar enough with gold. That was after my time of leaving Magic.
Oh, no, it was not. Legends was where gold cards came out, man.
Well, I didn't touch Legends, so I obviously have gaps.
So-
I don't know what gold is, but
Okay.
it could theoretically be introduced as a 6th or 7th color. And
it was
again,
just the multicolor cards. That if a card has 2 colors, that it got the gold.
Oh, gotcha.
Gold frame.
Oh, gotcha. I didn't realize that's what that meant. Yeah, of course. Yeah, there's lots of cards that require multiple colors. Again, it went to keeping the system as simple as possible. If you wanted to enforce complication onto a spell, like Fly, for example, is a real spell that DMs have trouble with. If you wanted to be restrictive on its use, you could require it to require burning both red and green mana, for instance, or whatever it is you decided to do. You could force them to have a specific type of color pattern that you would burn to be able to cast the spell. But I didn't necessarily include that. I kept everything just as a single color to make using mana as easy and as inviting as possible for people to get to incorporate into their game if they want.
So
did that answer the question properly?
Yes, you did. So before we started rolling, we talked a little bit about Artificer because I was interested in playing Artificer, but you said it's not currently available. Is there information about it? Because I just have this image of a little gnome with tech. For people who know the Magic card, tech.
Nice. So this book I was taking after the philosophy of Adventure League, where you can have the core books plus one other product. So the thought, obviously, this isn't an Adventure League type product, but using that philosophy, I wanted to make sure that everything that's in this book is consumer friendly, because D&D Beyond or Open Gaming License makes the core rules and almost all the spells, regardless of what they're named, all the spells are available and they can track inside this document. I will be providing like all the Xanathars and all the Elemental Evil and the Skag spells. I'll be adding those as a separate list that people can pick up if they're interested. It'll probably just be like a free enhancement. But those aren't core to Player's Handbook, so I left them out. And as much as I love the Artificer, it is not core to Player's Handbook. So I didn't want to include it in case you don't actually have access to the Artificer. I had to leave it out. But they have an alarmingly short spell list. So when you go through there, virtually all of it in this sorting of spells, all their stuff is white, blue, red, a little bit of green, and only False Life and Revivify are black. So an Artificer could get away with having only 3 black mana in their pool, maybe like 4 or 5. If you wanted Restoration, you could have 5 green mana, and then the rest of the mana could be split up among the other 3 colors that have the majority of spells. Most of their spells are white, blue, and red, like the vast majority of them.
Very cool.
So it's easy to convert it. And I wanted to take a little extra time to look at infusions to see if there was anything in particular about that that would require any additional caveats, and to prevent myself from having to worry about errata later on. Because when I build these things, I try to cover as many bases and look at as many angles as possible so that you don't have to ask questions by diving into the material. I mean, you guys are interviewing me, so you should be asking me as many questions as you want. But somebody that's investing in this, when they're looking at stuff, is like, well, what happens with this? Typically within the same chapter or the following chapter, it normally answers all your what ifs, because those are natural questions you're going to have. And if you ask it about one thing, you're going to ask it about everything. So you want to make sure that you're as thorough with all your variant rules as you can to make them as inviting and as inclusive for people to actually pick up and be able to use it without having to ask anything. So Artificer is super easy to build. I'm just taking a little extra time with the infusions to make sure that everything is covered, and I'll be able to drop that. And typically when I drop a new book, I bundle it with the core so that it costs less than core to buy both books. So like once Artificers comes out, if you have core, Artificer will be half off. If you don't have either one yet, you can pick them up for both for less than the cost of the core, because honestly, I just want people to be able to use it, and I don't want paid to be a barrier to that. So, but obviously I want to get compensated for the amount of time I put into it. So people that value will obviously put that time in. But anyway, Artificer is on the way, and there's actually a whole string of different books that I'm looking at. Like I won't bother you with all the details that come around, but there's a lot of stuff in the pipe.
Well, that sounds really awesome, and I'm really looking forward to seeing more of it, and maybe having you back to talk about the other books as they start coming out and getting previews into those. We've spoken for about a half an hour at this point, and I think that there's certainly more information that Brandon and I could ask you about. But we do want to transition to filming a separate segment for all our viewers, which will be coming up soon. So we're going to close up here, and we'll have more of your questions answered while we create characters. How's that?
That sounds fantastic.
Okay, great. Hey Blades, thank you so much for watching another Babies with Knives video. If you liked what you saw, please don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Go follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and come join the conversation in our Discord server.
If you want to keep content like this coming, come check out our Patreon and consider subscribing. All links for this is provided in the description below. And remember, come back next time to get honed!